was Lev Rosenberg, and like many of these artists, changed their name. My favorite, obviously, is Jules Pasquin. You can't get a more French name from that. He was a Bulgarian artist, and his real name is Julius Mordecai Pincus. Louis Marcoussis. Marcoussis is a small village outside of Paris where Louis Marcus goes with Guillaume Apollinaire. Apollinaire says, "This is a great name, Marcoussis. You should be Louis Marcoussis." So there's a lot of name changing going on. So Léon Bakst is primarily I would say he had the largest influence on Chagall. He was the great designer for the Ballet Russe. And the reason Chagall is in Paris in the first place is he's been working with Bakst on designs for the ballet Narcissus. What did he take from Bakst? Well, I think certainly this resplendent color that is really the hallmark of Bakst's work, and you'll see it in the case here with some of the designs that he made. This sense of Russia as being part of this kind of wonderful folkloric culture that it had, the history and the traditions. And this brings me to another important figure in Chagall's life, Nicholas Roerich. Roerich was the designer, you may remember, of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. He was an archaeologist, a poet, and a painter. This is a work called Our Forefathers, and it shows a sort of a Russian peasant playing the pipes to these bears. There's a tremendous sense of cultural identity and nationalism going on in this work. What Roerich was teaching his students, and remember Chagall was an artist from Vitebsk, which was in the settlement of Pale. You had to get a permit to leave there if you were Jewish. He had to get a permit, move to St. Petersburg, and study with these artists. That's why I think the fact that Bakst was Jewish was so important to him. The fact that he was a role model, someone who had actually become a successful artist and a world-famous artist at this time. Chagall is studying with him at the height of his fame. But Roerich was teaching him a different thing. If Bakst taught him about color, Roerich taught him about identity. Where you come from makes a difference. It makes you unique. It denotes the post-World War II avant-garde. To other people, it can include people like Picasso, anyone who wasn't French arriving in Paris. I think the critic who coined the term, who was a man called André Vourneur, had a different idea. For him, it was the artists of LaRouche. It was the artists who were primarily Jewish and Eastern European, who had arrived in Paris with nothing in their luggage except for the dream of making a contribution, becoming a modern artist. This is what these artists wanted to do. We are now in a different moment in the 1920s. You're beginning to see the rise of anti-Semitism and xenophobia. The School of Paris was formed in opposition to the École de Français, which was saying that these foreigners had no right to be there, that French art should be made by French people. What Vourneur was saying is, these artists have made a contribution to French culture. They've changed it forever. And if you think about it, Chagall is associated with the city of Paris as much as Utrecht or any Rouault or any other artist at that time who was born happened to be born in France. What Vourneur did was he brought these artists together, initially in critical writings, but later in 1928 in an exhibition at the Venice Biennale, which was received incredibly well. There were certain characteristics that he identified. One was eclecticism. Unlike most group formations up until this time, if you think of Cubism and Fauvism, these were artists who worked in the same style and shared certain viewpoints on the way art should look and be viewed. These artists ranged from the Cubism of Marcoussis and Zadkine to the Expressionism of Kisling and Soutine to the sort of almost neoclassical sense of Modigliani, who, remember, has died. He dies in 1920, having lived this kind of bohemian lifestyle to the full. So he's almost like the martyr. He's included in all these exhibitions because people associated him with this moment in which modern art was born. Léger was there, and I can't help but think when Chagall was beginning to grapple with Cubism, that Léger wasn't in the back of his mind too. This place had its own theater, and we know that when artists finished a painting, they would bring each other to their studios to look at it. Kogan is a much less known artist than, say, Léger. And so part of what I wanted to do with this exhibition was to also do an active retrieval. He was Chagall's closest friend. And we know this from letters that have resurfaced. And he was actually someone who is virtually unknown today, as I mentioned. He stayed at LaRouche. He had trained in Berlin and had actually shown with the Blue Rider group, the Blau Reiter. And this woodcut, I think, is typical of the work that he was doing right after he arrives in Paris around 1910. And we have this wonderful terracotta that I would urge you to pay attention. Why have you never heard of him? Well, he stays in Paris during World War II. He stays at LaRouche. He's eventually arrested, deported, and he dies at Auschwitz in 1943, which we did not know until we did this exhibition. Prior to this, his dates were born 1879, death date unknown. So it was kind of chilling to sort of realize this. Chagall writes the preface to a book called Our Artist Martyrs that was published in 1950, and it detailed all of the artists who had lived at LaRouche who were sent to the camps, and it's very chilling to read that.